Hey guys, this is my fanfic story I'm going to be reading you, and the main character is named Daria Lamberdo. Okay, so this is my fanfic that I wrote back in 2011 for Rockapella. We have quite a setup going on in this room at this very moment, so I hope you guys like this. Scott came onto the stage and put his microphone to his lips as the audience quieted. My stomach flipped. Don't need another rebel romance. He sung. He started singing doo-wops as the audience screamed. Then Sean came to join him, and the audience screamed once again. Sean began to sing. They sung in sync. I am your man. Oh, I'm your man. Do everything I can to release your love. Bring it back where it truly belongs, and every day you'll find you can relax your mind. I'm your man, I ain't leaving. Then Barry, Elliot, and Jeff walked on stage and started to sing and dance with the others. My heart fluttered as I saw him walk into the middle of the stage. Baby, not till the end of your days, I am your man. Barry sung the bass and looked into the audience. I wondered if he could see me sitting near him, looking up at him. Oh, how long till I thought you would come along? Oh, how long till I know you'll come along, baby, 'cause I'm your man. I loved how the audience cheered for them. It was thrilling to finally see them in front of a live audience. I knew they were glad that I was out there watching. I knew they were thinking of me. They ended the song like I had heard the other day in the theater, with a harmonized, I am your man. Chills went down my spine at how beautifully they sung the last part. I was proud. Our next song, Sean began, is called This Isn't Love. Scott found the pitch and Sean began to sing. This isn't love, who do we think we're fooling? This isn't love, why don't we just let go? I smiled at Sean, and he smiled down at me too. He saw me, and I was right beneath him, staring up at him. This isn't love, then it's just a game we play, and I ain't gonna let it go. They danced around the stage, wooing the audience. I tried to catch Barry's eye as he carried the low melody. He looked properly coiffed in the long purple tux dress pants. I just lost it. Okay. His hair was styled upwards, and his face was shiny and wet from the pressures of performing. Sean wore a colorful dress shirt that I thought was corny, a top hat, and black pants. Scott wore a blue embellished vest over a white long-sleeved dress shirt and black pants. Elliot wore a dress shirt tucked into his black pants, and Elliot wore a black dress shirt tucked into his black pants. Barry stood his place in line with the guys and barely moved from his place on stage, except side to side. He looked rather shy compared to how he owned the stage at rehearsals. This time, he quietly stood in the background, singing into his microphone. I felt shy for him too, but wished he would notice me below, encouraging him to keep belting out those notes. He smiled into the audience on the downbeat, looking into the crowd of people and piercing their glares, breaking the ice. Wrinkles appeared at the side of his face as he smiled as the audience acknowledged his glance. I wonder if any girls my age were here, any that liked Barry as much as I did. The song came to an end. And I ain't gonna play no more, no. Ended Scott, and the audience roared with clapping and cheering, mine included. I couldn't help but smile up at them. As Sean began to speak for the next song, I noticed Barry cross his hands in front of him, the microphone in one hand as he looked around and smiled into the sea of people. Sean spoke with charisma. For this next song, I'm going to need some help. It's a very special song that you all may have heard before. I tried to look at Barry, finding his eyes. He whispered something to Elle and looked into the crowd. He looked down and met my eyes, kind of shocked, but happy. Our eyes met, and he smiled back at me, his eyes slightly twinkling. I felt my heart warm up, so much that I turned my attention back to Sean, who continued to introduce the song. So, I'm going to pick someone from the audience to help me out. My heart thudded as he walked swiftly across the stage as a spotlight centered on him, and he ran down the stairs on my right. Barry and Elliot smiled knowingly to one another. I watched Sean, who looked around quite quickly in the audience. He glanced at me, turning his head, and came towards my row. Thump, thump, thump went my little heart. Here's a lovely lady who can help us. As soon as I heard that, I started to laugh. I bet this is why I had the lucky seat. He smiled straight at me as he walked nearer and nearer and held out his hand. The people around me looked curiously and excitedly for me as Sean came up in front of me. What's your name, sweetheart? He smiled down at me and winked as he held the microphone to my lips. Daria, I said teasingly. Would you be able to help us up on stage tonight? He asked. I nodded as he took my hand and whispered, Surprise. My face flushed as I walked up the stairs, knowing Barry and the entire audience's eyes were on me. A stool had appeared in the middle of the stage. Sit here, Scott said without his mic. My stomach was flipping as I sat down and crossed my legs. How do you spell your name, Daria? Sean asked, and Scott piped in. Let me guess. D-A? I nodded, flicking my hair back. R-I-A. I nodded. Yeah, that's right, I told him. So, Sean tried to sound funny. What color's your nail polish? I laughed as the audience laughed at the same time, and Barry asked in a seductively funny voice, So, what's your last name? The audience laughed harder, and so did I, as I flipped my hair back to give him a naughty stare for his question. Oh, you don't want to know. I joked. This is all from like a pre-recorded actual live concert, by the way. Side note. It can't be that bad, Jeff said from behind me. Okay, do you really want to know? Lamberto. The audience laughed as Sean made a funny face. Ready, Scott? Spell it, said Barry enthusiastically. Scott said, Okay, it would be L-O-M-B-O, French caviar, said Jeff from behind. Hey, that's mean. I hit his shoulder and laughed with the audience. So tonight, strangely enough, we're going to sing a song called Daria Lamberto, Sean said. I laughed and flirtatiously fixed my hair. Sean struggled as he mispronounced my last name. I laughed embarrassed, and Sean began to sing. Oh, Daria, how good you look tonight. Oh, Daria, Daria, Daria Lamberto. Then suddenly Barry made a loud noise as Rockapella busted out a familiar song. Pretty woman, walking down the street, pretty woman, that kinda like to me, pretty woman. I don't walk away, no. I put my hand over my heart and said, to the guys that surrounded me as I bobbed up and down, dancing along. They sang the first verse in a doo-wop style, and Sean made a growling noise and hugged me. Pretty, pretty, such a pretty woman, the guy sang as Barry came forward and sang, un, deux, trois, which was in French. The guys continued, Pretty woman, oh, won't you pardon me, pretty woman, I couldn't help but see, as Barry put his arm around me and bobbed up and down as he sung the bass line. I flirtatiously touched his hairy forearm with my small, by comparison, hand and looked up into his eyes, fixated on me, then at the audience. I playfully danced in his arms, and he squeezed me and let me go as Scott pulled me up to dance with him. But wait! What do I see? Is she walking back to me? Oh yes, she is walking back to me. Scott whispered for me to walk across the stage to Sean on the other end. I walked as model-like as I could and looked at Barry smiling at me. Sean spun me around and they ended, Pretty woman. The audience clapped excitedly, and I blushed, thanking Sean and descending the stairs to take my seat. I decided that to this day, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Next, Elliot Kerman will take it away with The Kingdom of Shy. Elle stepped forward and began to perform his song. He was great, but I couldn't get the image of the way Barry put his arms around me out of my head. I loved the smell of his cologne and the touch and feel of his strong arm. My treat, after Elliot finished, Barry stepped forward to perform 16 tons as the audience applauded for Elle. "This next song," Barry said and winked at me, "we did in a club in New York. When we were done, our manager came running backstage, and he came right up in my face and said, 'Don't ever do that song again.'" I smiled at Barry taking the spotlight as his voice boomed through the theater. "It was my solo. I was hurt." The audience laughed. So I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it was corny." Then I said, "That's why I like it," he said in a childish but arrogant way. A bunch of girls screamed. I smiled at Barry. He was too cute, and at this point my heart thudded for him. "It's corny. It's low, duh." The audience laughed again. I loved when he tried to be cool. And it was originally a Tennessee Ernie Ford song. He was the only guy I could ever sing along with. He thudded in his low voice. Rockapella began as Barry followed. "I was born in a driving rain." "Yes, you was," Scott said, and the audience laughed. "Trouble is my middle name," he continued. I can't sing the song, by the way. "See me coming, better step aside." Well, a lot of men didn't, and a lot of men died. Some say man's made of mud, real man's made out of muscle and blood. I watched as Barry concentrated profusely on his solo, and it made me so happy to see him taking the spotlight. This time, he owned it. He walked over to Sean and the guys and playfully gestured to them after the song was over. He bowed as the crowd acknowledged his lotus note on "Company Store." I applauded wildly for him, but I noticed he was too starstruck to even look at me. I noticed the guys usually referred to Barry as Bear, and I couldn't agree more how accurate of a name it was for him. He was large, in muscle tissue, and tall. He was rough and rugged, and his German facial features embodied the resemblance of a teddy bear. Whoopsies. His large button nose and curled lips, his furrowed teddy bear brows, his fuzzy, snowy white hair, and his stance looked peculiarly exact to that of a grizzly's. "This next song," Jeff said, as wild hoots and cheers from his female fans filled the theater, "is called Intermission." The audience chuckled and smirked as the laughter turned to applause as the guys bowed and the curtains closed. I stood up first and stretched. Then a voice from beside me said, "What a lucky girl you are. How did it feel to be on stage with them?" "Unreal," I nodded as the lady in the green gown beside me got up and smiled with her husband. "My wife's had a crush on Scott Leonard since they came onto that Carmen San Francisco show." I smiled. "Carmen Sandiego?" "Yes, that's it. She has a thing for blondes." "Oh, stop it, Fred." The lady blushed and hit the man's arm as they walked away. I must have a thing for bears, I thought to myself. I followed the crowds of people into the next room, which was the grand hall with refreshment booth. There was a huge lineup, and one could not barely move through the people, that it was so packed. I made my way to the line for the bathroom. It was my turn to use the fancy theater sink. I needed to fix my makeup. I took out my lipstick as some woman passed by and stared at me, probably recognizing me from stage. I heard a toilet flush. Then I heard a voice say, "Why did I put that in there?" Then I heard a voice say, I panicked. The purple suit was Barry's. They were talking about Barry. I quickly put my makeup back in my purse, but I didn't make it. A girl a little taller than me came to the sinks with blonde hair to her shoulders and a necklace with a black crystal on it. She had a black peacoat on with a purple scarf. I looked at her almost starstruck, then caught myself in mid-stare. She looked at me, probably estranged to why I was staring. A woman followed her with rosy cheeks and blonde curly ear-length hair. She had on a beige peacoat and a peach scarf. Her high heels echoed. I backed away from the mirror instinctively to make room for them. They fixed their hair. I began to apply more lipstick. "Hey," the woman smiled. I looked up as the girl went to dry her hands. "Weren't you having fun on stage tonight?" She smiled. I turned around. "Yeah," I smiled, shocked and content all at once. "Oh," I said as she giggled and walked away with her daughter. My face was as white as a ghost, as if I had seen a ghost. I came out of the bathroom past the lineup and heard a ding-dong noise, signifying the end of intermission. I made my way back to the theater and couldn't seem to understand why I felt horrified. I sat in my seat and the curtains opened back up again. I was excited, but not as excited as I felt before. Scott came on stage as a pitter-patter of applause was heard throughout the audience. "How are y'all doing tonight?" he said sweetly into the crowd. Elliot, Jeff, Sean, and Barry walked on moments after the applause grew. "Our next song is to my beloved wife, Clarice." Murmurs and awes filled the hall. "It's called Clarice, I Love You." Scott stared into the audience, probably looking for his wife. After, I forgot what it was. Sean announced that they would be singing Moments of You, and afterwards they riled up the crowd for Flat Tire in memory of a previous member, Steve Keyes. It was funny watching Barry making the sound effects for the car. They had cute choreography. Finally, Rockapella prepared us for the finale, the most loved Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Scott explained how they performed the song for years, and every time the kids would yell, "Do it, Rockapella!" the audience cried out in response. I didn't respond because I felt shy, and I think Barry noticed because he raised his eyebrows at me, his classic face. I laughed. Then he looked bored. I laughed. He then looked bored. Scott got the pitch. "You know what to do." "Do it, Rockapella!" the audience yelled. Barry made his starting noise that went something like, "Dee-bow." The group started out with doo-wops. Well, she sneaks around the world," Scott began. I remembered when they performed this song one of the first times I had ever met them in the theater. Now they were doing it large scale. I mouthed along to "Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?" Barry smiled and projected his low voice. They didn't end the song. They continued it so they could introduce the singers and give an applause for each. "Let me introduce you to Elliot Kerman, Jeffrey Thatcher, Barry Carl, and Scott Leonard," Sean said as the audience clapped cheesily to the beat of the song. How wonderfully cheesy. They performed the last chorus and ended with a bow. The crowd gave a standing ovation with respect to the a cappella band. The curtains closed. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. "That was quite a show," the lady in green beside me said. "I know," I nodded, starry-eyed and excited to see Bear. I waited as the crowds of people rushed in congestion to get out of the theater. I found a door that had written, "Public access prohibited," so I opened it and went as quickly as I could down the corridor. A sign pointed in the direction of the dressing rooms. I followed it and came down to a hallway with names on the doors. I knew I was in the right place. I came up to the door that said Rockapella on it and turned the handle. It was empty, so I got out my phone to check Facebook while I waited for them to get back. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Sean's face appeared. "Hey," they said as I smiled and got up. "Congratulations, you guys were fantastic," I said as Barry came up next to me. "Thanks," Scott said. "How'd you like our surprise?" Sean asked, and the guys laughed. "It was amazing. I had so much fun." "Glad to hear it." Barry smiled and put his hands in his pocket. The other guys gathered around the new food table set out. Barry stayed beside me. "Is this all you guys get?" I asked him. "Pretty much. Sometimes I wish I could have a mean steak and potatoes." Barry smiled with a glint in his eye. There were times when his smiles looked forced, but that was just Barry. "You were great. Your low note on your solo," I said excitedly, high-fiving him. "You were like, 'Store.'" I sung as low as I could and busted out laughing, as he did too. That's good," he rubbed his hands. But you gotta put more man into it. He fisted his hands. I smiled at him and he turned to the other guys and high-fived them. Sean approached me. You going with Bear? He high-fived me. You're amazing, Sean. If only Miss Queller knew how good you are at You're amazing, Sean. If only Queller knew how good you were at performing. I'm so glad you could come.
I'm teaching her.
My stomach fluttered as I felt a large hand on my shoulder. I turned around and knew it was Barry. I almost squealed and smiled at Sean. Sean winked at me and pat Barry on the back. I didn't understand. Where was Barry taking me? Did Sean put in a word for me? I couldn't believe this was happening. You got a place to go? Somewhere? No. I have homework to do. I blushed. He chuckled and hit my arm playfully. Let me grab a drink. We're leaving in 15. You better get all your stuff. Dear reader, I can't describe to you how happy I felt. It felt so perfect. I had all my stuff. All I brought was my bag and my coat, my phone, and some money. Barry was the perfect man. I wondered where he would take me. When we finished talking to Elliot, I pat Sean on the back and asked Barry, Where are you taking me? I stared at him with puppy dog eyes. You'll have to see for yourself, he told me. He got his coat off the sofa. Follow me, he told me, opening the door. He walked down the corridors, turning every which way down the halls. Do you get nervous? I asked him sweetly. Sometimes, he shrugged. He knew I was talking about performing. Like when the audience is so huge, like a sea of people, and you just get stuck in it and sing. You just gotta suck it in and sing. I nodded. But when I practiced, he looked at me to explain, I get taken to this magical world where it's just me and my thoughts. Wow, so you're that kind of performer. Yup, like you wouldn't believe. I looked at his dusty hair and his eyes shadowed by the light. I had to strain my neck to look up at him. He was so cute. I couldn't believe the horrible age difference that prevented me from behaving like my normal self, from goofing around and joking. I wanted to let it out, but I was so afraid I would chase him, just like the theater incident. We walked into what looked like the back exit of the theater parking lot. A limo was waiting with its engine on in the cold. A limo? For us? I asked. He chuckled and shook his head. I kept following him to where he took me around the left side of the lot. This is how I ride. He pulled out his keys, and the lights blinked from a vehicle on the other side of a minivan. He walked around the van, and I followed as he stood by a red Kawasaki motorbike, the one I saw at school. Barry, you're not serious. I laughed, so excited. He pulled out an extra helmet. Gatch, he said, tossing it into my arms. I put the helmet over my hair and clipped the front shut. He put his helmet on too and straddled his Kawasaki. Barry smiled as I stood shyly in front of the bike, slightly afraid, waiting for his direction. I don't know how to get on, I laughed. He got up and looked at me funny. Then he bent down and put his arm underneath my knees. He lifted me off the ground. I was surprised, so I giggled, and the touch of his hands on my legs excited me. He lowered me onto the seat of his motorbike towards the back. There, he said, happy? Thanks, I told him. He swung his leg over the bike and sat in front of me, his leather jacket on. He must have changed after the concert. Hold on tight, he smiled back at me. I was afraid and thrilled at the same time. I held on to him, speeding down the busy downtown streets until the city lights became a large blur of color. I gripped the leather of his jacket as he took me away with him. I felt his leg muscles pushing, his head whipping to and fro as he checked the street, protecting me. I rested my helmeted head on the back of his leather jacket, smelling of the material and his spicy, musky berry cologne, his berry scent. Every time he accelerated, I held him tighter. I was afraid and thrilled. The emotions just ran through me. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The motor would overshadow our human voices. The revving motor boomed and sung its blasted song in our faces. Our souls were one, rebels to the city streets. We whipped past Queen Street, Dundas, Yonge and Eglinton, past the shops and familiarity I knew. I cringed as he turned sharply. He didn't check to see if I was okay. He just expected me to hold on, and he didn't even question my ability. He trusted me to be strong. It felt like he knew me, and I knew him from somewhere before, like a dream. There were also times where Barry would accelerate and slow down in intervals, and I would close my eyes, afraid of accidentally letting go, and when I looked up, I was in a different place. unknown to my surroundings. There were pine trees and an open road, no buildings or houses or city lights. I figured I was in the outskirts of Toronto, nowhere near home or the boarding school. I wanted to ask him where we were going, but I couldn't since he was biking and couldn't hear. Out of my anxiety, I searched for a sign, and I found one that read Buffalo, New York. It had the distance, but it went too fast for me to see it. After a few minutes, I felt like I had to use the bathroom. I hadn't since the intermission ages ago, and was embarrassed to ask him to pull over. I raised a hand, the other holding him tight, and tapped his back. He spastically looked over his shoulder, and I yelled, "Can we pull over?" "What?" he yelled. Can we pull over?" I yelled louder. "I'll find an exit," I heard him murmur. And a few minutes later, an exit sign appeared for a Tim Hortons again. I thanked God because I had to go so bad. Very instinctively took the exit, and I felt relieved. We zoomed down the exit and came to the stop sign at the end of the road. I could hear him now. "You okay?" He looked back at me. "Yeah, I just have to pee," I said loud enough. "Oh," he smiled. "I'm going to stop at Tim's." By Tim's, I knew he meant Tim Hortons. "Thanks," I said before he began to go again. Whatever town we were in was beautiful. The trees and moon against the dark sky and the snow on the streets was so beautiful. We came to the Tim Hortons parking lot. I felt strange being so far away from him with a man 3 times my age who I barely knew on a motorcycle. I descended the bike and Barry followed, but I ran in before him and he turned off the motor. I went to the bathroom and fixed my hair and makeup. I still had on my skirt and outfit from the theater. I hadn't even realized I had rode the bike wearing a skirt. I came out of the bathroom and saw him at the counter with a toothpick in his mouth ordering something. "You drive so fast," I told him. "It was scary," I said, and he smiled. "And it was so much fun," I squealed. "And yes, I'll have a medium coffee, triple milk." "My treat," Barry said. "Oh, you don't have to. It's $2, he chuckled as we sat down. "This is weird," I began. "You're 3 times my age, and I just went on a motorcycle for the first time in my life." "I can take you back," he joked, but I shook my head. "I still want to know where you're taking me."